area.
The meeting starting? No.
No, we cannot hear construction.
Chairperson Tufankin, would you like to start us off?
Good morning and welcome to the Arts and Culture meeting for special meeting on January, what is it today, 13th, 2022.
Roll call, Commissioner Vidor.
Here.
Commissioner Vidor.
Here.
Commissioner Zadorian.
Here.
Vice Chair Yank.
Here.
Chairperson Tufankin.
Here.
Agenda item 1A, report of recorder reposting of the agenda. The agenda for the January 13th, 2022 special meeting was posted on January 10th, 2022 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Agenda item 2A, strategic planning for cultural equity and inclusion plan with the Aspire Group.
Would you like me to kick it off, Jennifer? Good morning. Dr. Gary Schaefer, Director of Glendale Library Arts and Culture. We are the liaison department to the Arts and Culture Commission. We're here this morning to meet with the Aspire Group. So we have joining us Diane Burby, who's the principal there, as well as her colleague, Naila. Just to recap where we are with this and how we got to this point. Last spring during an arts and culture meeting to discuss the 21-22 work plan, the Arts and Culture Commission shared the goal of wanting to establish a cultural equity and inclusion plan. So it is technically called a CEI plan for budgeting purposes. At our June meeting, the commission approved a motion recommending that we enter into a professional services agreement in an amount not to exceed $20,000 with the Aspire Group, a cultural equity and inclusion consultant, to research and analyze the external and internal cultural programming of Glendale Library Arts and Culture and the Arts and Culture Commission through a lens of cultural equity and inclusion, establish a cultural equity and inclusion plan which guides all culturally specific work of the commission and the library, including but not limited to calls for artists, RFPs, RFQs, inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism or IDEA programming, etc., and train staff and the commission in best practices for facilitating conversations focused on cultural equity and inclusion, specifically in regards to working externally with community stakeholders and patrons of Glendale Library Arts and Culture. In late summer, that contract was signed with the Aspire Group, and beginning in October, the library staff began working with the Aspire Group internally in an internal and external analysis of all programmatic initiatives of the commission and the library was conducted, and I assure you this is done in a very scientific way by the Aspire Group, and I'm really excited about the methodology that they are bringing to it. In November, the Aspire Group met with staff to discuss questions regarding programming, etc., over a couple of occasions, and that brings us here today to the special Arts and Culture meeting with the Aspire Group to discuss strategic planning for cultural and equity inclusion, our cultural and equity and inclusion plan. And just to the next steps, just to cover that off before I go off camera, before the fiscal year end, ideally this spring, there'll be, we're planning a special Arts and Culture Commission meeting, kind of a workshop or training, and then also to share the draft plan. And then in April, there'll be some staff training. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diane Burby from the Aspire Group. Welcome, Diane, and please take it away.
Thank you so very much, and good morning to everyone. It is our pleasure to be with you today. I am joined by my colleague and an associate of the Aspire Group. Naila, would you introduce yourself as well?
Good
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Naila Muiz. I'm an associate with the Inspire Group, and happy to be with you on this process.
And thank you so much for walking us back through that recap. It's very helpful context for what brings us to this moment. We have been very pleased to be invited onto the project and have dived in to reviewing of your prior work, and that has proven to be fascinating. We also had the benefit of meeting with the broad management leadership team earlier, and that information and engagement has been additional, very, very helpful context. In our time today, we want to talk to you about the approach that we are using in the review of materials and ultimately development of your cultural inclusion and equity plan. And we also would like to gather from you some very beneficial insights as folks who have been in the work and very much holding the vision for what goes forward as well. To that end, I'd like to invite a bit of opportunity for us to get to know you all. You know each other well, but this will be helpful to us. And if we could, if you would just share with us as commissioners your name, how long you've served as a commissioner, and what we are most interested in this introduction is one phrase that describes your feelings about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and access work, the cultural equity work that has been done thus far. We were impressed by the amount of activity that has already been underway. And in your introduction, just one phrase that really describes how you feel about the work that has already launched thus far. And so with that, I would ask if our commissioners can introduce yourself, starting with the chairperson.
Starting with me?
Yes.
Was that okay? My name is Caroline Tufankin. I am the owner director of Tufankin Fine Arts. I've been on the commission for, gosh, I believe 4 or 5 years, and really excited to hear about what has been done so far with the equity and inclusion. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would, to keep our rhythm moving forward, if you would just call upon the next commissioner, we'll keep it going until we've heard from all of our commissioners.
Okay. Chair Yang, Vice Chair Yang, maybe?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sue Bell Yank, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission. I've been on the Commission for, I guess it's almost 2 years now. I have been working in arts nonprofits for most of my career, and have worked on several CEI plans myself as part of that work. And my feelings about the work that's been done so far, I'm very excited, but I also recognize that this equity work is daily, and I want to, make sure that that's so embedded in our culture that we're doing this work on a daily basis. And then I'll pass it on to Commissioner Vidor.
Hello, I'm Jane Vidor. I am a patron of the arts and am completing, I think I've completed a little over 2 years on the commission. And I'm not familiar with all the details of the work that's been taking place regarding cultural identity and equity and inclusion. But overall, it is Glendale's goal to gain extreme competence in this area, and I have followed the various programs that have been supporting that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you call upon the next person?
Commissioner Vidor.
Thank you, Jane. My name is Arlene Vidor. I've been on the commission, I think, coming up 4 years or maybe 4 years. And I have to say that in terms of what we have accomplished, especially in the last couple of years since Dr. Schaefer has been here as a commission, as well as the General Library Arts and Culture function, certainly the programs that have been done have really exceeded my expectations in terms of their cultural diversity and the inquisitiveness of the programs and the variety. And I think that's really wonderful. But I'd like to echo Sue Bell-Yank's concern that we ourselves as a group and as individuals kind of learn how to live our future decision-making and what we do and handle things in the future. Because, you know, being who I am, you can see me, I see the world through the lens I've always seen it through, and I would like to be able to expand a little bit. So that's it for me. Thank you. And Savannah Zadorian, you are next.
Thank you. So I'm Savannah Zadorian. I've also been on the commission for coming up to 4 years. In the summer, it'll be 4 years. My opinion on what we've done so far, I think we've done a lot. We've provided great value for the city in all our new and continuing projects and what we've been doing. I think we've done a really great job at expanding that. But of course, like many of my fellow commissioners, I believe that it's not enough. And there's always more we can do. And so that's why we're here and having this conversation and working towards that. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank each of you. I think we've heard from everyone and hope we haven't missed anyone. And I trust that we hear in your introductions both the pride of what's happened thus far, as well as really appreciating the insight and understanding of the work ahead. And that takes varied forms. It's been beneficial for us with the great assistance of staff to sit with documentation that describes a broad variety of work that has taken place thus far. And the first phase of our scope of work is what we call a policy and practice review, wherein we are looking at your past efforts. We are seeking to understand why those efforts occurred, the context, as well as what they involved. The outcomes, the degree to which people participated, the content and expansion of awareness that was gained, any additional elements by way of implementation that are helpful to future endeavors. In other words, what worked well in the rollout of that effort? What would you enhance and do differently going forward? And were there any gaps? Were there any missed opportunities based on who you wanted to engage or who you could have engaged, what you had hoped to share or cover, who you had hoped to attract and draw as we talk about calls for artists and so forth. And from an equity standpoint, by way of practice going forward and the need for procedure and policy going forward, what enhancements, improvements, elimination of inequities would we recommend? So Naila and I have been putting ourselves to the task of reviewing your massive collection of documents that give us insight to that. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, an earlier meeting with the management staff allowed us to tap into human beings very intimately involved in that work. And we are going to ask you what we asked them. Following that train of thought, what we would like to know is what stood out for you on this journey over the last year, even 18 months, really. What would you describe as lessons learned or insights gained from both the efforts, the rollout of the efforts, and even conversations that have been prompted among you related to these efforts? Following hearing from you, we are more than happy to share with you just preliminarily what is standing out for us. You will obviously get the final findings at the end of our review work, but some things are even coming to the surface now. And again, we're happy to use our time today with you to share that. And we'll conclude by confirming what our next steps are going forward. So take a moment and really acknowledging for some commissioners, particularly those who said, you know, I haven't been that deeply involved, I'm pretty new to the endeavor. You, like we, then will use this opportunity to learn from those who have been involved in this very extensively. What would you lift up as lessons learned or insights gained? And again, I'll start with the chairperson, if you don't mind getting us rolling. And we would also invite you, like before, to think of who you want to call on next. And that's helpful to us in that Naila and I are working without the visual camera of the group just yet, but listening very carefully. So please, if you don't mind getting us started, Caroline, and tell us insights, lessons learned as a result of this journey of work.
Chairperson Tufankin, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Diane. I think one of the things that we've always tried to do is been very mindful about all the cultural diversity and cultural diversity and equity that is going on in Glendale. And we've tried to be very mindful of that. And we tried to do a few, a monthly, I think it was, what was it, Jennifer? It was a monthly programming. And I think the main thing that we learned there was we didn't want to, gosh, what's the right word to use? We didn't want it to seem like we're doing anything deliberate. We wanted to be more inclusive in a more natural way. So I think that is one of the main things that we're looking for. And maybe not compartmentalize, but be inclusive in all our programming.
Very good. Really ensuring that inclusion became that through line in all that you did. And do you want to say anything about what you've noticed or discovered as you all try to prioritize inclusion in all of as that through line. Any particular experiences or clarity that came to you in seeing that implemented?
Well, I think we're looking to implement it more broadly now. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We've done it on a very intuitive basis, and I think now we want to formalize it into our programming. So that's, I think, what we're looking to do.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. And who will you call on now?
Chairperson Yank. Vice Chair Yank, sorry. Coming up to be chairperson.
I'm frantically jotting down notes here, but I mean, just a few of the things. I'll definitely echo what Carolyn said. I think that was probably one of the things that brought this need to the forefront, at least of my mind, was Jennifer Fukutomi-Jones has been doing a fantastic job of outreaching to, many different diverse groups of artists throughout the region, and was getting feedback about some of our calls for artists that were more culturally specific, that it did feel maybe somewhat artificial, or sort of putting artists into specific categories. And I think that was a really good kind of wake-up call, in a way, that there were other ways that we could be using language in our RFPs, other ways we could be framing these calls for artists that would be much more welcoming and inviting and inclusive for any of the calls that we put out. So I think that's definitely of interest to me, is how do we really examine that language for cultural equity, and how to make sure that there aren't, barriers to access in the way that we're framing it, or the way that we're putting these out there. I think that one thing that I've also been thinking a lot about, and I think I've been very supported by fellow, other had a little sound issue there. Are we good?
Yes, sorry about that.
No worries. I think the other thing is just pay equity and for artists, which has just been at the forefront of my mind. And I think across the board, we've kind of been on the same page with upping that pay for artists as much as we can, and making sure that the pay that artists would receive, or the honorarium, would not be a barrier for for artists to participate, especially artists maybe from certain groups. So that I think we still can work on, and it would be really interesting to look into some kind of equitable pay scale, or rate card, or like what sort of makes sense, so that that's out there and is very clear. And then, I think a lot, I think I'll just end with a general comment, is I just think a lot about barriers to entry, or barriers to access for artists who are participating in our programs. I don't have anything specific really, but, are there ways that we could be more proactively lowering that barrier to entry? Like, could we be offering workshops on how to apply? Could we be offering more education? Could we be outreaching to groups of artists who may be interested, but they've never done this before, and kind of open up some of those opportunities in more proactive ways, is just something I've been thinking about a little bit.
It's an excellent point, and it certainly is part of what is emerging as best practices. The possibilities and questions you raise are transforming this field even as we speak. So please know that this is not work where it's been all figured out and somehow you all are just catching up. This is a time and a point in the work where we're learning and we're expanding. And new best practices are coming to bear as a result of that. So appreciate the points that you made. Who would you like to invite to speak next?
I think we'll stick with the same order. I'll pass it on to Commissioner Vidor.
Thank you, Sue. I don't have a lot to add to Chairperson Tufankin and Vice Chair Yank's comments, because I was taking notes as you were asking, as you were describing, Diane, what you would like us to be thinking about. And all I have that's different is just the language to basically say the same thing, that I think we looked at. I think we looked at diversity and inclusion too situationally, very situation specific, and that I think, I know I personally strive for, and I think the Commission strives to have a more organic, internalized leaning toward diversity and inclusion, and that it's not something we have to overthink. It's just part of the way we go, the way we move in the world. And I know for me personally that is it's constant. It's an ongoing pursuit. And thank you, Vice Chair Yank, for raising the issues of access and pay equity as well. That's all I have right now, Diane. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vidor.
Thank you, Jane. Well, yeah, I've heard so far, one of the nice things about speaking next to last, or is you get all the great ideas are out there on the table. And while my fellow commissioners were talking, it dawned on me that one of the things, we talk about, being too culturally specific at times and slotting different cultural groups into different recognition months or whatever it is we're doing. But I think we have to step back and look at the fact that artists as a group, which collectively includes everybody in the art world who might contribute to Glendale's artistic life, artists as a group are often maligned and discriminated against. Pay is definitely a part of that. What was mentioned about access and communication and facilitation of their participation and providing them with work is also an issue. And I wonder if we've also, I realize that our organization, the Arts and Culture Commission, the departmental function that handles it in the city of Glendale, is one of the primary conduits to achievement of cultural equity, inclusion, and diversity, which the city itself, we're talking about the top leadership and the senior management of the city, have committed to realize. And in terms of doing that, we are one of the most visible and active in our pursuit of cultural equity through the arts. And I'm wondering if you, the Aspire group, have talked to anybody outside of the cultural and arts and culture department about attitudes about it, because we certainly do need the cooperation and teamwork of our fellow departments to achieve this, and we need the support of our city council. And I think we're exceptionally important in realizing the city's goal of being culturally diverse and equitable. So, what's happening there, that would be a question back on that whole issue. And I'll turn it over to Savannah.
Absolutely. And before, Savannah, before you speak, I just want to acknowledge that excellent question and point that you made, Commissioner Vidor, because what I hear in that is, are you also going to check in on our broad attitudes about the values of the art and artists in the civic process? And will we be able to help shift attitudes towards the positive that sets a foundation for greater appreciation and inclusion for really the very population of artists that can be subject to many of the inequities we're talking about? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes, because that is an important piece. And I will say it will also come back to you all, because ultimately to shift for the long term is ongoing work, and the commission will want to put in place some things that you all do to stimulate that updating and shifting of attitudes, that growing appreciation. But I would also say wonderful best practice today says arts integration and civic strategy planning and development is a huge asset. An arts mindset and grounding as we try to counterbalance the effects of a pandemic. All of this has become far from icing on the cake and come to be realized as important pieces of the cake itself in this moment. So you raised some excellent, excellent points that we will be in conversation again around, I guarantee you.
Glad to hear it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Zadorian.
Thank you very much. So from lessons learned, I would say that we've all pretty much learned that there was a need, one for partnerships, coalitions, creating seats at the table for discussion, dialogue, in order to improve equity and embrace, learning for not just for us, but the city as well. Mm-hmm. And through that, by involving this interaction and collaboration, we can begin to break the molds, because Glendale has a very deep history. And that also comes with, having to apologize, and correct past mistakes. And so I think art's a great way to do that. Mm-hmm. We've been doing that so far in the last year or two, and I think that it's a long time coming, but it's a great way of doing it. I think we've definitely learned that obviously we have to confront all these things, but that there's many levels of inclusion. So there isn't a cookie cutter approach to covering all the bases, right? That identity is very complex. That there's intersectionality, overlapping identities, and we have to understand that intersectionality, determine what our focus is when it comes to these conversations. Mm-hmm. First step is seeking help. So that's where you come in, where we can improve ourselves as individuals, because we all have our biases, of course, but improving as a commission, improving as a city, creating those partnerships. I do believe that we've seen that there's a need for advisory groups, some sort of oversight and accountability. I think we serve as that for the City of Glendale Council. We have been that so far, and I think we can have our own advisory group, who has oversight and checks on us as well, checking our own moral compasses. I think that's pretty important, that maybe we don't really look at very often, but as commissioners, going into with our own biases, our own diversity on the commission. I think it's important to continue to learn and participate. I think, so no cookie cutter approach. I think that's the most important thing that we discuss about language and whatnot, and using art as the tool to accomplish all of these things. And, we definitely want Glendale to be a city for everyone. And art is, of course, for everyone. And so it's the means to do that. I think those are the needs I have come up with so far. There are always going to be more needs, but, covering most of those bases are the most important, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I believe we've heard from all of our commissioners. And of course, I always invite Jennifer and Mike to weigh in with their brilliance whenever it strikes them. I did have a follow-up question to that, which is, what have you noticed about the WHO? Who is showing up in the early stages of this conversation? So as you all have launched activities, courageously brought topics and issues to the table, what segments of the community have you found readily showing up for these programs and this conversation with you? In other words, what kind of professional backgrounds? Are we talking about artists? Are we talking about educators or a mix thereof? Who are you noticing that has shown up thus far in participation of your efforts? And I ask that because we're often asked, are you drawing the choir, or are you drawing the predictable cast of characters, or are you surprised by a new and different variety of folks who want to engage, who are interested in what you're seeking to do in this way? Anything you've noticed about the WHO?
I mean, I can answer that. This is Commissioner Zadorian. I think a lot of the people that we have been engaging and working with have been the cultural organizations, artists, city officials, students, educators. So it's the typical attendees, right, for our events and our conversations. I think that, we've discussed in the past, and what would be nice is having more people from outside Glendale. People that aren't normally in Glendale, people that would come here to enjoy our art and enjoy our events, and kind of people that are more not international, because that's a very broad scope, but from outside the city, because that brings new ideas, perspective, but it also brings new people to enjoy our events. So it expands on what we're doing, because art doesn't have bounds. It doesn't just stay within Glendale. It expands the city borders. So I think that's an important factor that I have thought about in the past, and that would be great, because Glendale has a very, specific group of people. We're a very diverse city, but there's always outside. There's always more, and it would be very nice to be more inviting in that way.
You described that so well. And what we do know from our work broadly across LA County is that, as you said, people both perceive art and consume art for us as a region, appreciating the unique character of each city, but not being bound by city borders at all, really interested and consuming art across these geographies. And so that is right on point in what we would want to increase by way of those who are engaging, and also offering input along the way.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zadorian. I would like to add to that I think we would also like to see more internal Glendale, different organizations, maybe businesses, and just the general public to be a little bit more engaged as well.
And would that be a want that you have had for a while, even as not just as it relates to cultural equity, but just greater involvement in this art space for that business sector or those broader sectors?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. What we know, and the reason we really enjoy doing work in this area, is while we tackle matters that can represent barriers to access or less than ideal inclusion or too little diversity, that when we make improvements in any of those areas, we make improvements in things that have a ripple positive effect in many other areas that you desire as well. And so it's not compartmentalizing either the importance or the possibility of the positive impact here. And so if we can garner the kind of closer understanding and connection from the business sector, this just becomes an entry point that applies to their greater appreciation and perhaps support for what you do broadly in the arts and culture space. Love that. Always love that. Any other observations anyone wants to share before we turn and share with you our observations?
Sorry. Arlene, do you want to go ahead?
I don't think it's my turn. I just wasn't sure anyone was touched.
Please,
So
please, we're kind of open forum. Go for it.
I just wanted to say that the events or performances, exhibits that that I have attended, I have noticed that the other attendees are largely ethnic groups that are to which the exhibit is relevant or the performance is relevant. I would like to see more diversity in the attendees.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see people who have not maybe been exposed to a particular art form that is typical of a culture, come and see that and explore that and learn from that. And I, rather than just drawing, if it's a Korean band, it draws Koreans. If it's an Armenian performance group, it draws Armenians. And I'd just like to see other people from all ethnicities and all cultures engage with others. I think that's the goal, is the mixing and just the sort of the organic movement into across the spectrum. So.
Absolutely. Cross-pollination.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. And Arlene, carry on.
Yeah, I would, I agree with Jane and with the previous commenters. And I would just add, going back to the same thing that I mentioned before, that, the department here, the Arts and Culture Department, the Arts Commission, and our basic followers, people who are connected to the arts, this whole thing has grown exponentially since I've lived in Glendale. There was nothing. I mean, this was like an artistic wasteland at one point. And, in a few years, things have really, it's been a burgeoning art scene. Mm-hmm. The thing that's missing, though, and everybody spoke to it, is the lack of a collective awareness and communication methodology, generally speaking. In other words, this department and this commission, are involved in the arts, and we're like an island in the city of Glendale. There is very little evidence online or anywhere else that the city supports and loves the arts. And they certainly, as was mentioned by others, don't communicate it outside the borders of Glendale. Mm-hmm. It's a very insular city. And as you all indicated, in order for us to be an arts leader and have a really vibrant, inclusive art scene, we need to get out of our insularity. We're just, it's a very, almost, I would say, provincial attitude that remains and hangs on from past eras. Mm-hmm. Glendale's heritage holds it back a little bit, and we need to counteract that. But we can't do it alone. We need to have the whole city machinery, I think, behind us to do it. And, I'll commend, Jennifer and Gary have already taken steps to help with publicity and a general arts awareness in the city by getting some help for us on that score. but I think we have to explore the attitudes of other leaders in the city and make sure that that we're all in the same corner as far as the arts is concerned.
Absolutely. Gary, Jennifer, anything you all want to add about what the arc of the journey has been in the art space? I love how you said, you know, this has evolved to a burgeoning art scene at this moment. And that's not a light comment. That's important context for the moment we find ourselves in.
So I would add just, I mean, it's accolades to Jennifer and what she brings to the city, her connections to the arts communities across Southern California, her engagement. She should get an award for the most interns ever gotten by one employee in the shortest amount of physical time. So, you know, so she's trying to get help, and those are almost, I think all of them have been very diverse interns, and I think that just adds to the mix. As far as artists go, as has been expressed, you know, we thought we were doing, you know, as typical, great things, you know, doing these, you know, cultural moments. And, you know, we aren't going to celebrate Black History Month in April, you know, or in, though we did things around Juneteenth, and we did things around the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. But I mean, I think we learned from that. So how do we both be inclusive, you know, so as we're also a library. And, you know, at one point prior to kind of the pandemic and the racial reckoning moment in this country, you know, we were accused of, you're not doing anything for Black History Month, when in fact we had this whole slate of things. We just, you know, it wasn't February yet, so we hadn't put it out there. So it's kind of like, if we do it, we're criticized. If we don't do it, we're criticized. So we just want to navigate those waters. As far as, you know, I look at it more, we have actually engaged in the arts community, and we took, you know, our Reckoning exhibit. And I think the team at the library took that to the next level. So one, you had this amazing archival project, which no one's going to be surprised when a library puts forth an archive, but it was answering kind of the call of the moment. And then they took that archive, which is normally a very dry thing, you know, only history buffs get excited about archives, but they presented it in such a way, I think everyone would agree, that it was presented in a way that was very engaging, and a person could kind of go as deep as they wanted into it. So I think that was great. I mean, they had audio and video files, and, you know, and some not good stuff, meaning, you know, the stuff it was covering, you know, we had to put cautionary notices on it because, you know, it could really cause trauma, you know, if you're not prepared for it as you go into it. So we had that. And then they took it to the next level when they brought in an artist to respond to it, which I thought was great. And it was not my idea. So I give staff credit, you know, for what they're doing. And then they also engaged with the school district. So, I mean, I thought around art. So I think that was great. And I say all that because I think, though, given that, where we've kind of done a really great job is on that cultural part. So when we presented the Be the Change, program, we took advantage of the pandemic in the sense that, you know, we were able to tap authors from all over the country because we're not bringing them physically to us. We had to do it online. We had stay-at-home orders. And then the next thing that staff did was, we shared it broadly with, you know, through our library network. So at least we could get beyond Glendale. And, you know, I almost am embarrassed to admit that most of the attendees we had good attendance, were from Los Angeles. We did have a handful from Glendale, absolutely. But sometimes, as others have said, it was, our usual audience, which is wonderful. Who doesn't want your usual audience at your events? So we had people that love the library, love the cultural programming, and so they were there. But then we ended up getting a lot of people. I think we had, I mean, Los Angeles, obviously a bigger city, but we were promoting it more heavily in Glendale. And that may speak also to the fluidity of Southern California. I mean, we've had people, they don't even understand that Glendale is a different city. They think it's a neighborhood of Los Angeles like Hollywood is, because we are immediately adjacent to it. So I think I've gone on enough, but I think that encapsulates in a nutshell kind of. I think we've done great things, but I also believe we can always do better. And I'm a disciple of continuous improvement. And so, even if we did the most stellar job, I would say, let's pat ourselves on the back for that. Now, how are we going to be better going forward?
Yeah. No, so appreciated. And so appreciate that I hear across this group a deep understanding that it cannot be just the volume of what we do, but there is such a rich desire that what you do have the deepest level of impact and positive influence, that it reaches the broadest cross section of folks, and that it lays a foundation for continuing to build upon and even to make better as you go. That's the work we're in now. I do often find myself in conversations with organizations, and we always start with folks recapping the inventory of what we've done, and that's a good start. It's far from the ending point. It is therefore the vision for that sits broadly in where and how does that reach the lives and transform the communities in the ways that you want. And so that's what our continuing work is informed by. Really appreciate that. Anything, Jennifer, you want to add to that?
No, everyone summed it up very well. And I think I would reiterate what Vice Chair Yank and Commissioner Zadorian also said, that this is a working, living, breathing document. And we're thinking about this every way and embedding it into our everyday work and our hiring practices and the artists that we work with. And like Director Schaefer said, I think this is a great opportunity to build upon the great foundation that we've set. And it's exciting to see what the next iteration is, and improving upon that to make it stronger.
Fantastic. Is there anyone else who wants to comment before we shift and share with you some of our insights, what popped out for us in our early review?
Believe it or not, I would. I actually neglected to mention that the city, we are the Arts and Culture Department, so we're certainly taking a lead from the arts and culture standpoint, but the city has engaged a consultant to draft a historical context statement, particularly, in the past, if I know some folks have experience with planning, that was done, let's look at our neighborhood and the history of our neighborhood. Well, this one is through a lens of, the racial makeup of the city, its past. We had a thriving Japanese American population prior to World War II living in Glendale, and just so looking at that through various, which doesn't live here anymore, and so looking at that as well. So they are addressing it from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
And then I'll turn it back over to you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, love that. And just let's talk around the field and strategically. This is an area you all are journeying through, because as you referenced before, not just Glendale, but as a country, we've kind of engaged our cultural diversity in compartmentalized ways. And this group looks to see representation and supports activities that represent and uplift their group. But we've not operated well as a country that says this is our collective history and heritage. This is our collective, what we all want to feel a part of and need to understand and know. And so as we've improved in that way, that's work ahead. That's not work already done. And so that becomes key to the strategies that we will be incorporating in your plan as well. So this, I'm keeping note for myself, is probably the third reference I said to you about an area that says, in addition to having awareness, you're going to incorporate leadership as you move other human beings along this continuum, because it's just the reality of where we are as it relates to where we want to go. With that said, I'd like to ask my colleague Naila to lead the way and share some of our preliminary insights as we've done your review of past efforts, and then I'll follow her commentary with a few of my own as well. Naila?
Yes, thank you. This conversation definitely, I echoed this sentiment at the managers meeting previously, but it's inspirational just listening to the feedback and the ideas and the lessons learned. You know, it's inspiring. And so I definitely am looking forward to, as we move forward in this work together, you know, just watching the expansion of what has already been laid down. I just want to make sure I capture that sentiment that I'm feeling, even listening to the discussion. And so looking at the policy and practice review, you know, just to make sure we're on the same page about what is policy and what is practice, even though it is within the words themselves, you know, I just like to spell it out so that's at the top of our mind what we're looking at. And so for the policy, the things that we're looking at is the documented procedures and protocols that are guiding the organization in its decision making. You know, and so that part about it being documented is very important. And that is what can come up as part of the review, that, oh, we have policy, but it's not documented necessarily. And then the practice is, what is the organization actually doing? And so we're looking at what has been out in action that may not be documented, that does need to get documented. And we at the Aspire Group, we have 5 anchors that lead us through our policy and practice review. One, is it clear and specific? Can you look at it and just without too much conversation around it, know exactly what it's saying or what is being done? And 2, is it actionable? Can people follow and comply with the policies that have been put forth? And then, is it achieving the intended objective? Is it actually meeting the goal that was set forth? Then next, we're looking at discrepancies. Are there discrepancies between what the policy is and what the practice is? And then lastly, we're looking at disparities. Are there people equally served by the policy and practice, or are those who are being served and while others are left behind? And so those are the 5 anchors that we look at in our review. You know, and just to put up front, there's a great amount of information that we review. And so there's definitely no shortage of what is being analyzed. And I want to commend GLAC and ACC on that work that has already been laid down. And it shows great promise. You know, it's compelling, it's inspirational, and it speaks to the library and the commission broadening that scope and that vision of what a library actually is and how it serves the community. And it's important. As some people see, you know, libraries as dinosaurs or outdated, but this is actually redefining how a library actually does serve the community. And the content that we're looking at, it appears very diverse. It appears preliminarily inclusive and broad, and so some of the key questions that have come up thus far, they're around the outreach processes, the accessibility, and the impact on community. And so I'll just go through and list some of the things that I noticed through my preliminary review, and which we will be going deeper into as we draw out the plan. And so one of the first things that I noticed is that adding a level of storytelling to the process, such as describing the relationship between GLAC and ACC and creating a timeline and a connection of the whole process, adding that level of storytelling, it helps to serve the whole process. As one of the someone mentioned earlier, like they're not familiar with all the work that has been done. That storytelling and outlining is an easy and quick way for someone to be brought up to date. And then the timeline, it also serves as a roadmap for connecting each project together to a central focus. And so those are definitely some elements that can be added to the process. Another thing is really documenting the context, the background, and what is the initial rationale for each piece of the project and the work that is being done. So really having that documented, one that can be added to the storytelling process, but it also is for data. And then detailing the process for your outreach, recruitment, and impact. So making sure that all of that is captured. Here's how we are going out to those communities. Here's who we're recruiting. And here's the impact on the individuals, on the community, on the organizations, on the businesses. And then, two, creating a process for collecting the demographic information for who is showing up. As Diane put that question out there, who is coming to the table? Who's coming to the work that is being done? Who's being exposed to the exhibit? That collecting that demographic information is highly important. And then developing a process for disseminating to a broader community. And so this is preaching to the choir, because I heard that sentiment echoed many times. I would like to see more people at the exhibits. I'd like to see people other than who the exhibit specifically is culturally relevant to, right? So coming up with a process for disseminating information on what's available and how it can be used is highly important. And then lastly, or second to last, establishing some sort of liaison or assistance that can be used to bridge the generational and technology divide, so that a successful completion through the application process for those artists who are otherwise qualified but may not have the technology that the application calls for, or there might be some other piece in the application process that renders them ineligible, but they're qualified on all other levels other than that technology. And then lastly, getting the input from community members and organizations on what is wanted and what would have an impact. Developing that clear process, as someone just spoke to, about how, we get criticized if we do it and we get criticized if we don't. So really having those conversations up front on what would be meaningful to you? How would our efforts prove impactful in your site? So going in, having that conversation so that coming out, there's a check on, yes, we listened and we moved forward to the best of our ability in these ways. And so those are some of the things that I noticed in my review of the different work. And so I turn it back over to Diane to add to the conversation as well.
Great, Naila. I think you did a great job. And what I would add builds on what Naila said in the strategy area. It is clear to us that the outreach efforts previously from everyone we have interviewed and talked to thus far are areas that people say we want to do better, be better positioned, have more extensive outreach, which is great. That is not about a distribution list. That really is going to be about creating networks of partnerships and collaborations that lead to a greater place on the radar screen. Let me just pause because these are not magic words, but they really do speak about the shifting of where we are. What's phenomenal, Jennifer brings, and I know I've been a fan of hers myself forever, but you know, she brings a tapped into a phenomenal network in the arts and culture space here in LA County. And the libraries sit as part of a regional network of libraries as well. And yet in both of those spaces, what is being said is that we need to activate our networks at a far different level in order to reach those who are not already in the mix. And one of the commissioners brought that up previously. To ensure there's good, clear, and inclusive communication to people who already know the system, who already know how to make their interests known, to submit bids on potential projects and so forth, is still important. The territory to add people to that dimension is a very different strategic journey. And that is clear from what we have reviewed, that not only is that necessary to do, but your creation of systems and strategies that will serve you well in continually doing that. Not one shot, but continually broadening, expanding, creating access, and becoming the source that people can tap into for their highest level of participation and engagement and opportunities can't be Glendale alone. But Glendale may need to activate a network or bolster a coalition of collaborators in order to reach these new spaces and new people with clarity and accuracy that Glendale will benefit greatly from. I pause with that. So at a strategy level, please know that that's probably going to show up as a high priority. The other thing that Naila talked about are not Glendale specific, but Glendale absolutely is called upon to step up your game with priority as it relates to things like the digital divide. And Jennifer and I actually, as professionals, first came to know each other in an endeavor that was exploring this issue issue, and came to discover that the differences around exposure and proficiency to technology are as significant as differences in artistic disciplines and mediums. And they won't fix themselves. It shows up in how artists can even bring their work forward for consideration. And it shows up in panels in terms of unexamined biases that can sometimes manifest, because I'm so impressed with what this person has put forward, who's proficient in using technology, that I end up scoring or viewing other art differently not because of the art, but the proficiency to use the technology for consideration of the art. Right? This is the new world we're in. So for me, I know that we're not in a world around a guilt trip. We're in a world that says structurally these things just can evolve. And how do we interrupt them? How do we get in front of balancing out what can become structural inequities, conscious and unconsciously playing out in our systems? And so those are just a couple of the examples that certainly stood up strong for us that says good work underway. How do we create the structures, the firewalls, the systems to ensure that these tendencies that can invite in bias are addressed? And by the same token, how do we ensure that you're putting in something in place that's nimble and pliable, where it will continue to evolve and be preventative to bias, as opposed to doing this in the moment snapshot sweep and clean, only to have something new show up tomorrow that the system wasn't prepared to, ward out or prevent. So there are ways to create our systems in durable ways, and that requires, again, not only good systems, good staff, but good commissioners who periodically are also looping around to not just what are we doing, but is it effectively hitting the marks, achieving the goals that we had hoped? And are there any indicators of new complications that we didn't anticipate that we can address sooner versus later before they cause inequity to get built into our ongoing ways of operating? I hope that made sense, that was clear. We have not seen raging red flags. We've seen very, very good and decent work in what I'm going to call generation one. First efforts are always generation one. The challenge is, where do you want to take your work in generation two? And that includes the enhancements that we've talked about, but it also includes what's the broader vision. And that goes back to those early comments that I heard you all say that I'm going to keep bringing back to your remembrance time and time again, that says our long view is that we want inclusion to be a through line in all that we do. How do we operationalize that in the most meaningful way? The second thing that I heard you very effectively say is that we want awareness and appreciation for the value of arts as a benefit to our civic lives and our governmental effectiveness to grow. How do we strategically make sure that doesn't get left on the side of the road, that's fundamental to what you do? And at the end of the day, how do we ensure that the cultural activities, efforts, and art exposures that we sponsor draw and engage the broadest cross-section of people possible? More than marketing and messaging, how do we set the stage that everyone sees this as a must do, a want to do in our area? One thing we haven't talked a lot about, and we will offer some thoughts about that, is the generational shifts that are happening in the arts and culture space. And that very much speaks to something that you all talked about in terms of how Glendale is viewed and how Glendale sits in a region. Having done a countywide cultural assessment, what I tell you is that millennials, younger generation folks, traverse this county very different than Gen X and baby boomers, that geographic boundaries are not nearly as much of a barrier for them as they are for me. 2 inches too far and I feel inconvenienced, but that is not the case with newer generations. Wow, what opportunity that presents. So how then do we make sure we're factoring that in as we talk about outreach strategies and engagement strategies and so forth? So those are just some preliminary juices that started flowing for us, and as Naila said, it was better than a good movie. We have really enjoyed diving into these efforts. Some we knew about, but a lot learned anew just from going through your past efforts. So wanted to open up to any questions or thoughts you wanted to share with us before we wrap up.
Hi, Diane and Nahila. Thank you so much. This was really excellent. I appreciate your approach, and I think, I really didn't know what to expect about today's meeting, but I really appreciated you listening to us first and really asking very poignant questions and making us think as well about what we've done so far and what to expect. I would like to know what the next steps are and what the end product will look like. And would it be something that, as you said, I think culture is something that is living and ever growing. And would it be a document? Would it be something that we can always go back to and change and amend? And, would there be maybe a session like this or a few sessions like this to kind of walk us through how to really incorporate all of this into our programming?
Really great questions. So our contract does commit us to produce you a document, a written plan document that becomes a roadmap. In that document, it will summarize what we found and offer recommendations on strategies and best practices to respond to any gaps, challenges, or even new opportunities that we think you could leverage to a greater degree. What happens with that is both the staff on the arts and culture side and the library side then translate that into action plans. And those action plans therefore include the specific programs, communication strategies, application guideline changes, and in the arts and culture space, we'll probably come back to you all with recommended new policies and protocols that will inform, your contracting and call for artists and so forth. So we want to give you something that's concrete and tangible that then, it's not a one and done that you reference back to each time you're making these major decisions, because we can see why is that an issue in front of us? What was the past situation? What were our best practice options? Why is staff advancing that we go in a particular direction as a commission? Therefore, once we've made that decision, we're helping to institutionalize equitable change that will be built in. That whole stage also kind of dovetails on an educational stage, because once we know what your primary areas, priority and action item areas are, we are committed and contracted to help equip you all. Here are some of the equity grounded, or what I'm going to call applied equity skills that will be helpful to you as commissioners, but also we do this training for staff, helpful to staff as they look to build plans, implement, monitor, and evaluate this, because it's all of those pieces. It's not good intentions are not good enough. You know, we build plans based on our intentions of outcomes, but we support plans well with good organized ways of implementing predetermined methods for monitoring and evaluating and folding in new learning as we go.
Great. And what can we expect going forward? What would the timeline be? And would you need anything else from us? Maybe another session like this, or?
It's a great question. So we will finish our formalized review and give you the plan recommendations. That finishes at the end of February. A plan is that we would bring that to you in your March meeting for you to get the official findings. And that will be our very next step in this process of receiving and responding to those findings.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Vice Chair Yank, any questions or?
No, I just want to thank you so much for your thoughtful process. And I think your analysis has been both encouraging, you know, that we've been kind of on the right track, but also very much looking forward to fleshing out what good steps forward are going to be. So I don't have any questions right now, but I just want to thank you for your work so far. I'm looking forward to you know, getting more in the details.
I'm going to quickly interject, Diane. I think to Chairperson Tufankin's question, I think there is going to be one additional special meeting session for this applied equity training skills, specifically for the commission, that we'll host ideally sometime in March, and we'll have to find availability for all of you. But to that question, there will be one more session similar to this.
Thank you. Chairperson Yank, sorry, Chairperson Vidor.
We're not going in order. Okay. Well, yes, same thing. Thank you so much. It's been very mind expanding, really inspiring and exciting to see where we're going to be headed. And I love the fact that your plan that you're going to roll out, the broad plan and methodology by which we can accomplish all these things, is going to include specific and tangible roadmaps to how we logistically implement procedures and then can track them back to this larger strategic plan. Because one thing I have seen is that sometimes a plan is developed and it has, you know, whatever the name is, and then it's called the plan, and it doesn't go any farther and it never goes anywhere because no procedures are implemented to trace out how the plan is to be implemented. And I'm really thrilled that you're going to see us through the process of being able to realize the plan tangibly. So thank you for that. And thanks to my fellow commissioners. I love being on this commission. It's so stimulating.
You don't do that. Sorry, Chairperson Vidor, I did not mean to skip over you. So
I'm just a commissioner. I'm not a chairperson, but You would make us all chairs. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
an honor. We are all the chair people. Thank you, Diane. I am wondering if there will be, with the plan in place, will there be benchmarks that will allow us to evaluate where we are as we move toward the goal? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, those monitoring benchmarks will be established. And thank you for your question, because it reminds me to point out, what we have found most effective is that a benchmark is important and not just an outcome statement, because the ultimate outcome may be years down the road. What is very effective are what are the first and repeated signs of progress and affirmation that we're headed in the right direction. And those we want to be intentional about laying out, those check-in points and those what would be indicators that would suggest that. And excellent point. Those are definitely built into your monitoring plan.
Very good. Very good. Well, thanks a million for such an informative session and good research and all of that, and look forward to the next session with you. Thank you. And I don't know where we are in the order, so I'll just mute myself and let Chairperson Tufankin figure it out.
Commissioner Zadorian.
Thank you. I do not have any questions. I'm just very much looking forward to, and I thank you for taking the time to meet with us and have these conversations and help us and guide us. It's very important work, so thank you very much. And thank you, fellow commissioners, as well as staff, for setting this up and making it happen.
Thank you all for such great input as well.
Definitely. Thank you all for your work, and I look forward to our continuation.
Thank you, Diane and Naila. Director Schaefer, is there anything you'd like to add? Shall we close this discussion item?
I'm good to go. Thank you. It was excellent conversation, and appreciate all the commissioners, bringing very important conversation thoughts to this discussion. We really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Diane and Naila. We're really looking forward to continuing the process with you. If we can move on to the next agenda item, Chairperson Tufankin, that is adjournment.
Yes.
Okay. We are adjourned.
It's adjourned. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.